Let me show you how a recent CBN announcement is quietly shifting the game in the banking sector and how investors are quietly positioning themselves to take advantage of this situation. June 14th, 2025, CBN announced a very shocking news to both investors and to banks. They suspended the dividends, bonuses, and foreign investments for banks under regulatory forbearance. Now, on a surface level, this sounds negative, but behind the panic is a wealth of insight that if you know how and where to look from, you'll be able to get profit from this particular news. Now, I'm going to break this down. Let's scroll down a bit. The Central Bank of Nigeria has issued a fresh directive instructing banks operating under regulatory forbearance to suspend dividend payments, defer bonuses for executives, and halt investment in foreign subsidiaries or offshore ventures. Now, the central bank is simply saying, if your bank is not financially strong, don't pay dividends and don't issue any bonuses. Now, this instruction would affect a lot of banks that rely on forbearance to stay afloat. Let me explain this forbearance so we can be able to understand it. This regulatory forbearance in banking is like the CBN saying, we know you're not meeting up to certain expectations. You know, there are certain requirements that CBN has imposed on some of these banks. And they do not want to penalize these banks for not meeting up to these requirements, because penalizing them would trigger panic or a collapse in the system. How many of us remember Heritage Bank? Currently, Heritage Bank is underwater. So the CBN is trying to avoid a case of that event happening in a large scale. So that's why they're issuing this directive. But usually, forbearance are issued during uncertainties or economic stress, and to help banks stay afloat without shutting down or being taken over. And sometimes they are also issued to bank with the understanding that at the back end, they can clear up some of their books. They can organize some of their books. So in the first place, because not all banks are financially healthy, some would be under forbearance. It depends on several factors: liquidity threshold, loan loss provisions, their capital adequacy ratio. So this particular news is to help these banks that are under forbearance. But investors are not looking at it from that perspective. So CBN is saying, hey guys, protect your capital, don't give her cash. Focus on rebuilding your financial health, and shareholders should not profit from the bank on life support. Because if CBN had not issued this particular directive, a number of banks between 2 to 3 years would be experiencing liquidity issues. And that's what CBN is trying to avoid. Hence, they are coming up with this directive. This directive is not addressed to all of them. On a superficial level, it is addressed to all of them, but not all of these banks are under this regulatory forbearance. So what this means for investors is some of them are looking at it from a negative perspective, and some are also looking at it from the bright perspective. Because for banks that are under forbearance, no dividends, price of such bank stock would literally drop. And the ones that are not under forbearance, They will be attractive to investors, and of course, investors are not loyal. They go where the money is. So these stronger banks that are not under forbearance would attract these investors, and they could literally drive their price back up. I'll show you a vivid example of how this took place with GT Bank. But before then, let me point out something to us. Whenever regulators like this, in this case CBN, they apply pressure to weak institutions, it is indirectly amplifying the strength of those that are not affected. So I'm teaching you how to look at news from a perspective that you can make profit of it. So this is what the market is missing, and this is what a lot of investors are missing. So when regulators are applying pressure on weak institutions, on institutions under forbearance that are not able to keep up, on the other hand, there are institutions that are able to keep up. So while some investors are panicking or dumping their bank stocks, some smart investors are looking at these banks that are not under forbearance, GT Bank, Zenith, Stanbic IBTC. They are relatively strong, and they have a good track record of paying dividends. And some of these strong banks, aside the ones I mentioned, they are not under forbearance. So if any of these stock experiences a pullback, because by virtue of this news, it's going to create a shock among investors, and many investors would be selling their stock just like they did last week. So for some of these strong banks, it will be a discount or window shopping opportunity. If you have been eyeing GT Bank for some time, it will be an opportunity to cash in when it goes down, especially with that dump. Let's look at something. GT Bank as a case study. GT Bank is currently at 83 Naira. So here's a chart. I'm just loading. Just loading. Now this is the chart for GT Bank. Look at this date carefully. Can you see this date where this vertical line is placed on? You can see the date 16th of June 2025. Did you remember when the news was released? 14th of June. So on the 16th, the market pulled back for a while, and investors who understood what I'm explaining now took advantage of this particular stock, and they bought all the way. You were buying the dip. And guess what? Between 16th of June to 20th of June, just a period of 4 days, GT Bank has done 20-something%. Are you seeing how investors are taking advantage of news? While some are panicking, some are reading and decoding this news on a deeper level for their advantage. So most of the investors are not just sitting down to read the news. They are decoding the informations that are not on a superficial level. For some of them, they researched which of the bank were not affected, which of these banks were not under forbearance. And if they had any stock with these banks that are under forbearance, they would likely reshuffle their portfolio or reduce exposure to some of these names. Then allocate some of these funds to these stronger institutions that are not under forbearance. So when all of them experiences pullback, the stronger banks, like we're seeing with GT, would get a quick recovery. So these investors are not just panicking like every other person. They are taking strategic position, using news as an instrument. So this is just one example of how news is not just something you screw by or you scroll through as an investor. You read the news, you decode it. Because every headline contains a money clue. The question is, do you know how to read it? Just like the way investors have they've made profit from this GT Bank as a result of this news. Right? So why this regulation initiated by CBN is good, like I've explained before now, investors are not just looking at that superficial information. They are asking, how can I take advantage of this information? Who is profiting? Who is making loss? And they would want to pair with whoever sector or which of the asset class this particular news favors. So they are using news as a profit tool for them. So they are not just looking at the news from a superficial level and they are panicking. So now, still looking at GT Bank, even if it goes down and pulls back for a while, these investors are positioned to buy this. Why? Because it is part of the banks that are not under forbearance. So insurance cover them. So any pullback is a buying opportunity. Any pullback is a buying opportunity. Any pullback is a buying opportunity. So I hope if you have any question, please don't hesitate to let me know. I just gave an instance of how this CBN news has fetched a lot of money for investors. Came as a shock, came as bad news, but a number of investors have used this particular news to make profit. So I will be taking a course, a mini course on how to decode news, how to take advantage of news as an investor in the stock market to profit not just in trickles, to profit big from the financial market. The link should be down in the description box. How investors can take advantage of news to make profit from the financial market. So I just gave a classic case study of this particular news, and I broke it down into several pieces, showing you who this particular news is going to affect, who is going to benefit from this news, and how investors are going to react based on these information, and they will make profit from it. So in just 4 days, a number of people who bought GT Bank because of this negative news, by virtue of what they know, they've made 20% profit already. And any pullback for GT Bank is a buying opportunity. And not just GT Bank, any of the banks that are not under forbearance. So I hope this short video has opened your eye to seeing news not just as a consumer, but from an investor's perspective. Now, until we see again, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this particular video and stay profitable.